Well, welcome everybody. This is episode number 14 of our online series. I'm Allan Tate, and I'm here with my co-host, Irving Wladawsky-Berger, and we have a special program today as we have our guest, Barnard Crespi. Barnard has been a longtime member of the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium organizing team. So I and Irving have known Barnard a really long time. And he's been the co-founder and co-CEO of Datatel since 1994, and he has deep expertise in the intersection of payments, security, and emerging technologies. And I would say that we had Barnard on for an Innovator series back in November. We liked it so much that I invited Barnard to come and do a pre-event session at the symposium. So he'll be doing an open conversation on May 18th. This is really interesting stuff. So with that, hey, Irving, and hi, Barnard. How you guys doing?
Thank you, Alan.
I'm looking forward to this. Should be
Yes,
fascinating session.
This is going to be a great session. Let me do just a brief housekeeping before we begin. First of all, the next CIO Symposium is on May 19, 2026, a few months away, I think 3 months. We're also going to have a pre-event for VIPs on May 18th. I also want to take a moment to recognize our community sponsors. This is a new sponsorship program we just introduced this year. They're the people who make our online programming possible. So I'd like to thank Point 5 for their support. Point 5 is your one point of contact for globally managed connectivity needs. And I'd also like to thank Valley Cyber for their support. Valley Cyber provides hypervisor ransomware protection using AI behavioral detection, prevention controls, and automated remediation. The other thing is, I just want to overview the extensive online programming we have in our online community now. This is available to people who are members of the community. We have two levels. We have Friend, which is free, but you'll be gated, so you have to be a member of the IT community to get in. And then we have the Innovators, which is a paid subscription, $75 a year. So coming up is our Innovator series. This is on Tuesdays. We typically have one a month. This is where we do technical deep dives and open conversations. On March 3rd, we'll have a session on Agentic AI, and also on March 17 on Agentic AI. We have two different guest speakers coming in. Check our exclusive event pages for more details. Then the partner series is on Wednesdays, and we have at least one a month. That's open to friends and innovators. On February 25th, we're doing a special program. It's going to be hosted from Florida. We'll be introducing our partner, Connecting Giants and Unicorns, and this is run by Chicha Dwarka. So join her on the 25th if you hear about this soon enough. I don't know when this podcast is going to be released, but we have another one coming up on March 23rd with Mass Cyber. They're going to be talking about building organizational cybersecurity resilience. And finally, we have the Inquiry series. This is the new series that we just introduced. We've been doing sessions every 2 weeks. Session number 4 is coming up on February 26th on a Thursday. And the next one is on Thursday, March 12th. This is the one on this Thursday is how do machines decide what problems to address? And the one in March is how should machine intelligence be evaluated. Basically, Irving and I co-host this, and what we're doing is we're taking the topic of artificial intelligence and we're peeling back the onion one layer at a time to make sure that you understand how AI works and also why that understanding is important to senior executives working in the age of AI. So, with that, I'm going to get right to it and begin the conversation with Barnard. So Barnard, look, if I'm a CIO these days and I'm looking at agentic commerce, I mean, is this real or is it a demo or, can you just level set the stage for this conversation?
Absolutely. And thank you, Alan and Irving, for inviting me today. Uh, so, if I'm a CIO listening, I would not believe this just because of demos. So, I'll believe it because of what's happening. And I'm going to give you an example of what's happened in the last 2 weeks. And this seems, as you know, Alan, I've been following Agentic AI since its inception, more or less. Nobody really knows when this started, but it was a long time ago. But if we look at the last few weeks alone, you have, and I'm going to throw some big names out there because it's important to, look at the patterns. You have Unilever committing long-term to AI modernization with Google Cloud. We have Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt, all of them actively integrating AI into booking flows, for instance. We have OpenAI moves into helping you search to helping you check out. And that is a partnership that they have, for instance, with Stripe and PayPal embedded. You have Microsoft in the last couple of weeks rolled out its retail AI stack. You have Adobe now deploying open standards so merchants and businesses can structure data around AI agents. You had Resolve AI, which actually just completed a $230 million acquisition. Alibaba, for instance, just released its latest version of a generation, a generative agent model. And you had Alipay in the last couple of weeks who announced that they're processing $120 million in AI-enabled transactions per week. So that's not a demo. I mean, that's purely operation at scale. So what's changed in the last year is pretty simple. Agents are stopping to recommend and started to execute. And once payment networks, and I talk Visa, MasterCard as payment networks to, differentiate who's who, and cloud providers step into the execution layer, you're not experimenting, you're not in experimentation territory anymore. You're watching infrastructure being built, and that's very exciting.
So,
So
so,
it's no
so
longer, in my
Bernard,
opinion, no longer demos.
okay, so the key change then, if I understand you correctly, is we're going from a world of AI providing recommendations to a world of AI actually executing transactions on behalf of their client. Is that essentially it?
I look, we're still in an era of human in the middle. I still consider the current model of agentic commerce being an AI assistant model. But on the merchant side, we are still seeing acceleration as to you don't have agents or live staff handling that level of transaction. You have AI on the merchant side also interfacing with whether it be your agent or a human. And again, I mean, there is the full-on agentic agent to agent 100%. We're still not there, but there's a lot of acceleration right now. And as I said, as I mentioned, what I find super exciting here is that there's some serious commitment by some serious big players in this space rolling out commercial infrastructure versus just, toying around with ideas.
So I was on a call this morning with a potential sponsor, and I mentioned that I was getting ready for this podcast for you. And she immediately said, "Oh, we're heavily involved in agentic AI. That's going to be a big thing. It really reduces the friction of doing the transactions." Now, I didn't dig into what she meant by that, but maybe you could just outline, like, what are the key use cases? Why do I, as a consumer, care? How is it going to make my life better?
Well, the most, without getting into, because we could talk about how AI is being agentic, is being used in commerce, but what most people are seeing today is that AI is helping them make that purchasing decision. Let me search for, I want to buy a pair of shoes and I want to make sure that they're this size, and make sure that I get the best return policy, make sure that I have the best delivery, and the user providing the constraints and the guidelines as to how that purchase needs to take place. Now, I that's something that I still call AI assisted commerce. It's what's happening in the background, the decisions that are being made for fulfillment. You talk about, there's a couple of players that I was actually talking about, is that they are handling, it's not just a consumer, but how the business is handling those inquiries, which is super exciting. This is really where, I'm seeing most of the agentic work being done right now, is how organizations are beginning to modernize their infrastructure to support their customers.
So, all right. So, actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to bring Irving into this conversation because he's kind of our technology historian, among other things. So, Irving, can you just zoom out for us for a minute? And so, from my point of view, we've been developing digital commerce,
Yeah.
well, since I was relatively young, at least, and this was in the early internet stages. It was
Right.
like people posting pictures on a website, and then you call them up to make a purchase, to all the way to Amazon. And do you see this agentic commerce as like entering a whole new era? Is it just a continuous phase? Can you frame it out for us?
Yeah. Let me say a couple of things to begin with. First of all, Bernard, I read your articles in the MIT CIO partnership page, and they are excellent. So I encourage everybody to go to the MIT CIO website and look at those articles because it's an education in agentic AI commerce and agentic AI in general.
Yeah,
Now,
and we will include links with the video, by the
good,
way.
good. That will be really good because the articles are superb. Now, Allan, you mentioned historian. Well, as it turns out, I was more than historian because in the 90s, when we were implementing the internet strategy of IBM, one of the major parts of that strategy was e-commerce. And initially, IBM was working with the different credit card companies, Visa, MasterCard, maybe some of the banks, to say, well, anybody who wants to pay with a credit card needs to get something called a certificate of authority, which was a pain in the ass because it said you have to apply for it, whatever. And so people were not using it. And eventually, what broke the jam is that the credit card companies, Visa, MasterCard, probably American Express, said, listen, if you lose money because your credit card was misused, we'll make up for it because we want the volume of e-commerce to grow, and we were prioritizing growth over you're getting the certificate authority. Bernard, I don't know if you remember those conversations that took place in the 90s. And as we know, e-commerce exploded because people felt safe that if anything bad happened, then they would not lose their money. The credit cards would make up for it as long as they didn't do something stupid. So now we are in the world of agentic commerce. And I view this as two stages. I think the first stage, let me say, Bernard, is more evolutionary because I think the banks and the credit card companies and the e-commerce companies are learning what works and what doesn't work. And I honestly think, based on what I learned from your articles, is they are being very responsible and very deliberate. They are testing what they plan to do, and they're testing it by having pilots and so on in the marketplace. And they're not just opening up saying, okay, we don't need humans in the middle anymore. You can do whatever you want to. No, no, no. They're being deliberate. That's the first stage. And Bernard, I don't know how long that stage will last. Maybe you can tell us. The second stage, once we all become comfortable that we know what we're doing and that this works really well, is going to be revolutionary. I think agentic AI commerce will really revolutionize e-commerce even more than it's been revolutionized in the last few decades. And Bernard, I don't know what that will look like, let me say 20 years from now, but so I see the testing, more cautious steps that we are in now continuing, and then the dam will break and it will take off. Is that a good way to think about
I
it?
think that's a very good way to think about it. And I always love listening to Irving because he brings stories from the past that most people don't understand even, you know, it is, going back to the days of the acquirers or the processors used to handle 100% of the liability for any misuse of credit card information. Today, we are in the era of, or up to Agentic, we were in the era of slow liability shift. You do this and you're not responsible. You do this and you're not responsible. Or you do this and now you're fully responsible. We're in an era right now, and I'm going to say that, that liability shift is moving daily in real time, depending on what organizations actually do. And I'm going to just go historically here and say, we're leaving an era of commerce when it was assumed that there's always human in the middle, where they actually clicked a button, they gave their credit card, they entered their PIN, they tapped their credit card on a put the chip in. Even mobile commerce, assumes that someone is actually scrolling, comparing, and tapping to buy. Now we're moving into an area where discovery and the transaction are collapsing into a conversational layer, because that's no longer just an action. This is a conversation that are taking place between a person and an agent, and an agent. And I'm not going to talk about what Google, OpenAI, and eBay are doing, but they are restructuring around us, which means that liability is actually, again, is in flux. Now, this is
Mhm,
just, I don't look at it as it's an interface shift, like just things are moving around. I mean, commerce, to the question, your original question is, commerce is moving from interaction to delegation, right?
mhm,
And that's really, really what the big move. And I did a post the other day, and I said, there's three questions that I always consider when, and we will be talking a lot about trust, right? And the question number one is, who's accountable when an agent makes a bad decision, right?
mhm,
We know who's responsible in the old model of trust delegation and liability shift. Like merchant did a bad decision, well, you're responsible for it. I mean, that's what, for instance, PCI is all about, right? And it's in your merchant agreements. If you don't follow the following rules and you do not a smart thing, well, you own that. But who's going to own it now? So who's authorized to do the purchase? That's another thing. In the I'm going to call it pre-agentic model. It was always us, the consumer. You authorize the purchase, you're responsible for that.
mhm.
And the third, but and again, there's a kind of other questions that keep popping up every time as things move, because it's moving so quickly, is who carries the risk when something goes wrong,
Yes.
right? And I'm not going to go, there was a conversation that I was having a couple of days ago. And actually, Zoya actually brought this thought to me. It says, AI is probabilistic in nature, right? And commerce requires to be deterministic. You need 100%. You cannot run probabilities. It's either transaction is either accepted or declined. Is that card belong to the consumer or it doesn't? They said that they're going to purchase something. Did they say a yes or no? And the challenge now is that we're introducing a layer that is probabilistic in nature by design. And so, there's a lot of I have more questions than answers around this topic.
So,
And
so
Alan, if I may,
I want to get Irving. I want to get back to something you said.
yes, yes, yes.
So there's two things. First of all, you said that right now, the human is still in the loop. The human is still the one that clicks buy, and when that stops being the case, when the agent essentially clicks buy, then the dam's going to break. I guess I see that there's a different use case, and I see that it brings up, different liabilities, but I'm still not convinced that there's this huge shift in reducing the friction of purchasing. Like, what is the claim? Are we saying that the volume of transactions is going to go up by X% because agentic AI is not in place? I mean,
There's some numbers out there, and I think these are McKinsey numbers, and they said that in the next 2 years, the lift generated by Agentic and handled by Agentic is going to be between $3 and $5 billion. Sorry, $1 trillion,
so
not
that's
billion, trillion.
that's
That
that's
is,
that's above and beyond how fast
uh,
commerce.
I, I'm not. That's where, in what way the transactions are going to flow, because they're going to flow from traditional mechanisms. Still you have the knuckle buster around. Uh, but the reality is that as people begin to have conversations, because remember, AI today, as we know it, is fully conversational, right? We don't know if there's no data right now yet to see the lifts, except for like
All right.
the Alipay. But I'm just saying
Let,
it's an
let,
interesting
let, let,
question.
let me give you a use case, and then Irving, I'll get to you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I say to my agent, hey, go out and get me a new pair of sneakers. Now, the agent knows my history of buying sneakers. It knows what my size is. It knows my preference. It knows the brands that I prefer, right? That's all in its, So it says, sure, I'll go out and get you a new pair of sneakers. And it does some research, finds a great pair of sneakers, thinks I'm going to like, makes the purchase. They get delivered. And I'm like, yo, agent, these sneakers are terrible. Now whose fault whose fault is it?
Yeah, very good question. And one thing that I really liked in what Barnard said is he defined the concept of know your agent. Let me explain. So the reason the credit card companies were comfortable absorbing the losses that happen with fraud and whatever in credit cards is for, I don't know, at least a few decades, we've had this concept of know your customer, KYC, correct, Bernard?
Yes.
That is correct.
Where the credit card companies and other financial institutions, maybe the banks also, I think they were legally obligated to have done the whatever it took to make sure that they trusted that this customer was who this customer said it was, um, to reduce the amount of fraud. And KYC, it's fair to say, has worked really well. That's why the credit card companies are willing to accept the liability when something goes wrong.
And to add to that is that they're working with fraud models that they understand. There's
They,
enough historical data.
right.
It's all about, I always look at,
No, no,
actual.
you're right. You're right. In fact, I remember at IBM, but later on I was a consultant at Citi, and they had whole departments of fraud analysis, but whole super smart analysts who were very good at doing that, and that's gotten much better. Now, Bernard, you introduce a fascinating new concept from know your human customer to know your agent.
Yes.
KYA.
Now, here's the interesting thing. Commerce has always assumed that there is clear human intent. And this is really where it gets interesting because you talk about know your agent is what is the agent intent? You know, and that's really where it gets interesting. It's like how do you deal with fraud systems? And current fraud systems will need to adjust. And I the technology is growing at such a pace that the existing fraud systems are, you know, like Irving, they got built over decades. It's not just right now we're talking about weeks and months. Identity models of how you identify yourself, and go back to know your customers and know your agent. Those identity models need to evolve as well, because right now we're still on version, I'm going to call it version 2, right? To now moving on, and then again, this liability framework that we're working on, like that you were talking about before, managing risk and passing on, that also has to mature. Because the question isn't who clicked, it's who authorized that agent to act on someone's behalf. And
Yes.
and that's really where I think that there's needs to be a rethink. And
And
look,
and it and the liability is not just with financial institutions that have lots and lots of experience, but if an agent buys something on your behalf from a merchant and it turns out to be terrible, or they make a reservation in an airline or in a hotel on your behalf, and you say, this is terrible. Who is liable? Is the merchant liable? I don't know the answer. And I'm very comfortable with financial institutions because we
Well,
have
is
a
the merchant
history.
liable or is the consumer liable for authorizing the agent to make a transaction on
Well,
his or her
but
so
behalf?
that's
so
the question. I don't know the answer.
So there are two things to keep in mind. Uh, and because we're talking about payments and we're talking about, let's just assume credit card payments for now. You've got two different types. You have the relationship between the merchant, the business, and the acquiring bank credit card process, and you have the relationship between the consumer and the card brands, meaning Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. I've yet haven't read the newest version of these agreements because they've been the same agreements for the last decade, right? And I know from a conversation I was having with one of these very large payment processors that one of the biggest issues that they're having right now is how do they measure risk and how do they write down that risk? And because it's all management risk. How do they write that risk in these agreements? So to your point, it's like question is, well, who is liable? Because today is very well defined. I think it's moving faster than the legal departments of these financial institutions, meaning the acquirers and the card brands, uh, can act. And I think that that's perhaps one of the reasons why they are jumping into building infrastructure to the beginning of our conversation so quickly. It's because they cannot predict or adapt these who owns a liability in paper. That's just an assumption that I actually am making, but
So Bernard, let me just take what Irving said about KYA and expand it a little bit because okay, you have fraud, you have being able to verify that an agent is authorized to make a transaction and so forth. But at a bigger level, there's just the question of who has leverage in the agentic world. So if you get back to the question, the scenario I gave you, I just asked my agent to buy me a pair of sneakers. Now in the current world, right? The vendors advertise to me they want me to buy one brand over another, but now I've authorized the agent to do the research. So now, does that mean that the brands have to provide information that's machine readable that's going to convince the
absolutely.
agent to direct me to buying a certain brand? Is there risks that the purchasing decisions are going to get gamed? So I'm my
So that's an
agent's gonna,
interesting,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So who
So
has leverage? Is it the
okay,
merchant, the platform?
so
Yeah.
let's break that down a little bit. Okay, I actually wrote about this a few I'm going to say weeks ago. I wish it was a few months ago because I was very concerned about some stuff that was going on. Now, I do believe, again, it's very fluid. However, or like for instance, Google introduced a universal commerce protocol. I mean, I'm not going to get into technicalities of what
I
that is,
learned
but
that
is
by the way, anybody who wants to learn about it, like I did, read your writings in MIT CIO.
and they are trying to define an open standard around, to your point, how does products and services become discoverable? And how do agents interact with each other? And it's not one protocol. There is here's the interesting thing is you have protocol on top of protocol all working together. You have the UCP, which is a universal commerce protocol. So how AI systems are going to move from recommending products to, completing full purchases. And this is already inside of like Gemini. And Microsoft's already introduced this. Even OpenAI is actually working with these protocols. And then they've introduced these other layers, agent to agent protocols. Again, it's sponsored by Google and some other organizations. And then you have the AP2 protocol, which is the Agentic payments protocol as well, that talks more about the payment layer. And you've got all these protocols working together. Now, I am hopeful, and I've seen that this is moving. Every week I turn on, and you would probably see this in my newsletter. Every week there's a new release. And every week, when I started looking at the AP2, that was in version 0.1 in September. And now it's already being deployed. But again, in top of these layers, you've got the card brands. You got Visa and MasterCard. So my take on them, I was talking to one of the product leads at Visa on this, is they want to be the trust layer, right? And they can. They want to be the trust layer because they're big enough, because they deal already with the network tokenization side of it. Uh, this is a orchestration of a lot of systems and protocols put together. Now, mhm,
Well, so I was just going to ask Irving to come in. It sounds to me, Bernard, like what you're describing is that there's a tension between this being a governance issue on the one hand, but also just a market structure issue. And both
Yes.
things are going to be happening simultaneously. There's going to be competition, for
absolutely.
eyeballs, or for agentic AI doesn't have eyeballs, but you're going to be competing for the equivalent of, machine bandwidth. Choose your product.
I 100%. Well, here's what something that happened probably again 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, did this partnership with Shopify. And as you know, Shopify now in the United States, for instance, they're the leading e-com for mid-sized small business. Now, what again? There's a lot of information that's not available to all of us, but my interpretation of that is that they are going to integrate and they're going to search for Shopify merchants because they were already optimized for AI, and that means less bandwidth for OpenAI and ChatGPT. But they were going to automatically become discoverable. And one of some of the conversations I heard, and again, some of the conversations that I was having with larger enterprise who have invested tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, on building e-com infrastructure, is that, well, if we can't be discovered by ChatGPT, who is the biggest, fastest growing, call it consumer used AI agent, what will happen to us? Like, I mean, have we thrown around all this money? So a lot of CIOs right now are trying to make, and we'll talk about this during the session at the symposium, is that one of the decisions that they have to make is, well, do we need to operate in two different environments? Do we have to have a legacy system running on UCP for everybody else who's not ChatGPT? And do we need to port some of our inventory over to Shopify? There's a lot of decisions that have to actually be made. I mean, it's just what's interesting is it changes every single week.
Hmm.
What's fascinating with this discussion, Bernard, is you are pointing out that commerce is an incredibly complex, sophisticated system. That's what you're pointing out. And payments are a huge part of that, and we understand that. But now we are adding a whole new wrinkle, which is if an agent is going to purchase something on my behalf, could somebody bribe the agent to pick their product? And I don't know even what I mean by bribing the agent, uh, but is the agent supposed to act as a fiduciary on my behalf, making sure they have my best interest? And
And,
now
and
we get, and
so
I don't know
to,
what the
to, to,
answer is.
to amplify Irving's question, Bernard, I think what you're saying is that for this whole thing to scale, it's really the trust model on multiple
Yes.
layers that has to be well defined, both in terms of product selection, financial transactions, and everything else. And that in fact is more important than the raw intelligence of this new um,
In
artificial
fact,
intelligence.
I would say that markets, commerce, capitalism runs on trust. If you don't have trust, our whole system doesn't work. Am
And
I
that's
being
where,
am I
yes.
being too?
Yeah, yeah. So,
No,
would you agree with
I'm
that,
with you.
Bernard? That trust is
Absolutely.
the
I,
keystone to scaling this thing.
yes. I'm going to say that trust is the bottleneck here.
Yes.
Okay. The real issue won't be, dramatic AI misbehavior, in my opinion. It's what if the agent overspends? What happens if they execute outside of the policies? What will trigger those governance issues? The trust manages everything. And until, and going back, I'm going to go back to the know your agent situation, right? Is who created that agent? What authority does it actually have? What are the limits? Can we audit it? It all revolves around trust. And then not just one trust on the agent, it's a whole ecosystem around it. And I think that this is really, sorry.
Well, no. So I just like you to focus on that ecosystem, if you will. Drill down on it because you mentioned a whole bunch of companies here. You got Stripe, you got Google, you got Visa, you got MasterCard. They're all doing things. Are they doing the same thing, or are they all building different pieces of a
I
system that's going to come together?
so so I think that all of them. And I mean, I've had conversations with Visa, for instance. I was talking to someone a couple of weeks ago, one of their leaders on the Agentic side, business side, and says, we know what our strengths are, and we're going to focus on that. The good news, the good news and exciting news is that they are doing it in a collaborative approach. You see this UCP, that is a collaboration, and you just go to their website and you'll see it. It's a collaboration of
Could you just
companies, of
spell
all the
out
companies.
UCP?
As that's unified, that's you as in, UCP, just UCP. So unicorn, Charlie Papa.
Got
And
it.
that is, and that would be, so if you actually go into the UCP and you take a look at what they're discussing, you will see that that's a collaboration of organizations. Again, that's a universal commerce protocol. That's what
Yes,
it's
right. That's what I
called.
was.
Now, again, there's no two organizations that are doing necessarily the same. Visa is taking their own approach. MasterCard is taking, and they are somewhat in a way collaborating to make this a more trustworthy environment. I'm very positive about that. I started getting a little bit concerned I'm going to say about 2, 3 months ago when I saw this partnership between, OpenAI, ChatGPT, and Shopify. I said, oh, they're trying to corner the market. I thought, oh, this is going to be like AOL on the first few years of the internet where they controlled all these users and that was their own closed loop ecosystem. But what I'm seeing And what we're seeing generic in the industry is that there is collaboration. There's open standards coming out. Whether they are perfect or not, that's a different animal altogether. But they're approaching this the right way. You see, and again, there's a lot of information in some of the articles that you've mentioned. I've provided some links in there,
Are there
but they
some
are
different
working together.
camps? Is there some competition here? Like one group of companies
So
going one way, another?
I as I said initially, I started seeing some. I saw OpenAI with Shopify and and Stripe come up with their own model. But as a UCP model started to evolve, and I mean evolution here happens in weeks, not years. I started seeing that they were starting to collaborate, meaning Google started jumping on board and working with OpenAI, for instance, and started working with Shopify. The players are working and they're realizing this is a collaborative approach. We need to gain the trust of the users. And the only way to do that, it's going to be through
Mhm.
working together. That's just the current observation.
Yeah. Well, this conversation, and I takes me back to Adam Smith, and he wrote in The Wealth of Nations, I think, that markets can only work. Let's say if you're going to buy bread from a baker, you have to trust that the baker will make you good bread, safe bread, healthy bread. And the baker will have to do that because if he or she doesn't do that, you won't buy the bread. So, and this goes back to Adam Smith, that the capitalism, marketplaces all work on trust, and we keep expanding the definition of trust. And I think what happens is that if there is a player that doesn't play by the rules, I think the marketplace eventually rejects it. I don't think they'll be able to survive for long.
I agree. What I am, and I'm going again, I know you can add some links to this after this conversation, so I'm going to share something with you, but I want to sort of read out to you what the official protocols and core systems are as of today. Now, there are, of course, everybody, there were a lot fewer before, but we have the OpenAI, what they call the ACP protocol. Uh, you got the Google Universal Commerce Protocol, which is becoming the most widely participated. I'm going to use it because it is by participation, open standard. You have the MCP, Modern Context Protocol. Again, that's more about how APIs will talk to systems. That's all backend stuff. You have the AP2 protocol, which is more deals with the payment layer. You have the A2U protocol. You have the X402 protocol that is being used more by Coinbase crypto payment protocol. And there is this other HTTP 402 payment required type of protocol. Now, so there's a bunch of protocols that are coming out. It's a very complex world, and then there is the network frameworks for trust. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a thought here is what I am very optimistic here is that we are seeing collaboration. You asked a
Mhm.
question before, Alan, is there somebody are there competing standards? Usually they are at the beginning until they figure out, and that this is, what's happened over the last few months. But what I think that what they're figuring out is we can't do everything by ourselves.
Right.
And you have a company like Google who's actually stepped up and said, we're going to lead the collaboration. We're not going to lead the standard,
Right.
but we're going to lead the collaboration. And when you have these companies like the large networks, the large fintechs, the large technology companies banking into this, that makes it that everybody is understanding that there's a trust element to it that needs to be solved. I am fairly confident that we will get there in the near future. I'm not what I am still again going to go back to is trust will continue to be a bottleneck for the time being. Our organizations, to the initial conversations that we were having with Irving is It all depends on how organizations are going to start experimenting, deploying, which part are they going to invest in. Um,
And that segues to my next question. So, I'm a CIO of a large enterprise. What should I be doing right now?
I am going to leave you with a couple thoughts on that. Okay, I'm going to make it very compact. So if I'm a CIO, I'm not asking, should I build an AI shopping bot? What I'm asking is, where can machine-initiated transactions enter our systems? That's a very key question that they have to ask. Does the identity model that we're going to deploy support non-human actors? Because the fact is that there's non-human actors today, right? And most organizations built on I'm going to call it today is a legacy system. Everything is human initiated. That's not necessarily the case. Are our policies machine readable, right? And do we have visibility into delegated authority? Those are I'm going to call it practical questions for this year that CIOs need to actually be asking themselves. They need to be preparing themselves for this new way in which I would like to say the consumer, but an AI is a consumer today. They are a participant, and are they prepared for that? Now, there's a bunch of other questions. I mean, I'm just trying to oversimplify it exactly where they need to, you know, uh, focus on.
You know, when you mentioned the CIO, Allan and I have been talking about how more and more and more responsibility is being piled up on the shoulders of the CIO, which is not a bad thing if you are the executive director of the MIT CIO Symposium,
Impose
meaning you have a long, this is a big deal that CIOs have. And the reason is that the CIOs have to truly understand the technologies. They have to know what's going on, but they have to know how the business operates. They have to be trusted by the business. And so if you said, well, it's the CEO, well, the poor CEO doesn't have to understand all the technologies you and I were talking about. If you said it's the CFO, they have their hands full with financial matters. So when it comes to technology and how it's transforming markets, companies, and everything else, I think that's falling on the shoulders of the
Oh,
CIO.
100%. I mean, they're the de facto expert on something that you need to be learning every single day. And I will find it, it's interesting because I heard Mike Grandier said something the other day. He was talking about the AI anxiety, and how, CIOs, CFOs have this anxiety. We have to get this done. I mean, our competitors are doing it. Everybody's doing it in the company. Look what they're doing. And now it's falling on the CIO's responsibilities. That anxiety is going back into the CIOs. Well, what are we doing about this? And how are we doing this? But at a scale, at a speed that they never had to deal with before, because things
Mhm,
moved a lot slower. Today, things don't move that slow anymore. So
mhm.
it's a massive role right now, specific as we start moving into this era of agentic. The role that CIO is going to, they're going to take and they're going to assume in navigating organizations through these, all the
So,
decisions, challenges that they have.
And by the
so
way, we see that, Alan and I see this along with some of our colleagues, because we have this competition, the MIT CIO of the Year, the Symposium CIO of the Year. And I have to say, Alan, the quality and the responsibilities of the people that we're talking to and the semifinalists and the finalists, it blows my mind.
So, Irving, can you compare and contrast the CIO's role when it comes to risk and liability? So, in the case of commerce, what Bernard's talking about, Bernard, you just went through a whole series of explanations on, very structured standards and so forth that are being used to manage transactions and risks and everything else. But on the other hand, agentic AI is being experimented with in all kinds of other domains. You have vibe coding, you have
Mhm.
this open claw phenomenon. And, I'm not saying that there's a right and wrong, but Irving, can you just talk about the CIO's role with respect to risk and liability?
I think here is what I worry about. That, there are a lot of people saying that in 3 years we'll have artificial general intelligence where the AI on its own will know more than most humans. And Irving, wait another 2 years, and we have artificial superintelligence, where they will do much more than all humans. That's taking a very technology oriented view of the way things work. I tend to be more, let me use the term conservative because I don't know what term to use, that the successful technologies are those that have been deployed at scale across the economy. At scale. That means they work at scale, and that means things don't get to scale unless you've experimented, unless you've tried it, unless you've screwed up, you've back off, there's been regulations, and that takes time. So I think I have tremendous hope and interest in AI, but it will clearly take quite a bit longer than the people who are saying AGI and ASI in 3 to 5 years because of all the experimentation and testing and so on that it takes. Bernard, am I being too conservative?
No, I don't think you're being conservative. I think that because of the speed that things has been moving, again, I go back to the question that Irving had, 2 years ago. Is like, how do we test this? I think that right now we are on this innovation acceleration mode, right? Everybody is testing, everybody is piloting. We have one of the panels we're going to be talking about, how AI impacts the P&L. But as things start to, I'm going to call seep themselves into the enterprise, there is going to, at some point in time, caution is going to start really kicking in. We're going to start looking, and the CIO and the C-suite and the boards are going to start looking at AI as we need to take a couple steps to start doing for due diligence, to build good governance. That usually, some people call it red tape. I call it being cautious, and protecting the investor, protecting the employees, protecting the marketplace. So, although the tech will potentially be there, the question is how quickly is it going to be deployed massively?
That's
Because the
right.
risk, once the idea of risk starts settling in, right? No, but no, none of these big companies who are investing millions want to take risk. That's not built, that's not cooked into their model. So I think that the tech will get there. Is how quickly are we going to really see deployed at scale?
Yeah, that's my feeling.
Yeah.
So Bernard, just coming back to a comment you said earlier. So McKinsey says that there's going to be trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars going through these agent-mediated channels by 2030. Do I have that
Yes,
right?
that is correct. So I'll tell you so I have a couple comments around this. So if trillions of dollars start moving through agent mediated channels, which they are seeing, I mean, again, when you start talking about one organization, the Alipay, $120 million per week, and that's just getting started, right? The compliance structures have to matter there. So, we are still, like, for instance, we're starting to see now capital markets reward companies building these layers of AI, right? We saw that what happened to the market a month ago when they realized, boom, this is going to actually impact the market. So we're seeing early stage I'm going to call it a replatforming in commerce. Things are changing. And that's really what is exciting about the economic impact that this is going to have. Not just there's shifts. There is, and this is an area more of Irving, but it's more about there's change in behavior of how people, we used to Google everything. Right now, we are chat GPTing everything. And
Okay.
that
So what's the opportunity for the small merchants to get their products recognized by the agents and to participate in this wave?
Great
Um,
question. I try not to promote companies and this, but if you want a quick get ready, look for a e-com platform that is agentic ready, and it is out there. I'm not, of course, I am not here to. I'll let them actually call me for a
but
sponsorship
but but,
deal
the, but there
or
is
something like that.
opportunity for smaller
But
vendors to
I
participate.
100%, and I think that it's actually greater than bigger enterprises because bigger enterprises have proprietary e-com platforms, uh, and they are slower to move. And you have smaller organizations, I'm talking about mom and pop shops, who can today go out to, again, company X, who actually provides out of the box agentic ready e-com site, and it's immediately discoverable by OpenAI and Gemini. So is there an opportunity that can do it right now? A lot faster than a large enterprise can. And that's where I think it's quite exciting. I feel, and I know we're short on time, but that's a whole different discussion about how this is changing retail as we know it. Because we've been discussing the commerce layer of it, which is a transactional layer. There's a whole retail aspect of it that this is also transforming, which we didn't get to dive in today.
Yeah, so as far as time goes, we can go a little bit over if you have the time, but do you have a hard stop at 11:30?
No, I'm good. I'm not hungry into noon,
Okay, I just got a few more things.
of course.
So you got agentic commerce. We know the CIO's got to be involved, but this thing has its tentacles all over the enterprise. Who are all the people that need to be in the room? The CFO, the legal department, risk department. I mean, who? If I'm a CIO, who do I need to gather to talk about this?
The board?
The board.
Yeah.
I agree because look, boards are going to their C-suite and saying, "What are we doing about it?" Here's the thing. I'm going to go back to so many articles about this, about the whole AI, anxiety. This is hitting every piece, every department is being encouraged, as we're seeing it, to use AI in agentic in order to modernize the business. But this is again, this is a different conversation about how do we rework, how do we look at the work that we're doing within the organization, and how are we going to reform that. As far as agentic goes, in terms of commerce side, any anybody who is actually like operations because they deploy payment systems today, finance, this is a very big, they deal with a lot of the risk, and particularly, we started talking about who's responsible and who's accountable. You talk about chargebacks, that's usually goes back to finance, so again, they're going to have to deal with this. So I don't think that as this evolution happens, there's one team, one department, one part of the organization that is not touched by this.
Okay. And so as an organization adopts this technology, what's the use case that scales up that can be honestly called agentic commerce rather than just plain vanilla digital commerce? What takes them over the finish line?
That's a very good question. I think most anytime now that you actually have automation built in, that is, I'm going to call it powered by generative AI or LLM, is actually considered to be agentic in nature. Now, to what degree? Because when we were at the MIT symposium, one of my thoughts initially, I had my topic has evolved so many times over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It keeps changing, right? But what we need to actually keep in mind is that agent to agent, human initiated agent transactions. Anything where I'm going to call it the agent AI network and platforms are at play are going to require an organization to be prepared to deal with that. Specifically, those who are customer friendly, like if you're a B2C type of organization, I think this is something you cannot afford today to stop thinking about this. And one particular point that I think it's important to make is that, the whole concept of SEO, because this is also changing, the marketing. Uh, Now it's not any longer SEO, which so many companies started to invest, like investing over the last 25 years, is how are you generative AI ready from a marketing perspective. So this is it's changing the whole
What
concept
do
of
you
it,
mean by SEO? I'm sorry.
search engine optimization.
Oh, okay.
And so the new version of search engine optimization for generative AI is actually GEO. So that is the new version, and this is how or companies of all sizes were optimizing their sites for discoverability by the search engines, primarily by Google, because I mean they are the search
Mhm.
engine.
So Bernard, if I can just take a moment, I just want to emphasize for people listening all of the little subdomains that this agentic commerce covers, right? So we've been talking a lot about the individual consumer going from getting recommendations to actually having an agent do an initial purchase. So there's initial purchasing, but there's also travel booking. There's replenishment of supplies that people might need. There's subscription management. There's B2B purchasing. There's also purchasing of tickets, the concerts and events. I mean, and all of these have slightly different use cases. I mean, it's just endless. And I probably only scratched the surface. Can you just comment on how broad this opportunity is?
There's a statistic that I was read before we walked into this call, and this is important to actually. These numbers are astonishing. So 48% of buyers use LLMs today to do purchase research. Okay, that in its own, think about the model when everything we did was about being in Google because merchants depended on that. And if you were at the top of Google, you earned, the trust, and you also earned the traffic and you earned the dollars. Now, the other stat that I actually read about today, which was again very interesting, was that buyers complete 70 to 90% of research before reaching a site, and they're using mostly today generative AI, i.e., Google, Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude in order to do this research, right? And the other most interesting statistic, and I'm just going to leave you with this last one, is that click-through rates in traditional search are down 20%.
Really?
So,
Interesting.
yes, yes. It's a massive. Now, again, I don't know how verifiable some of this information is. It certainly was not AI generated. I know that for fact, and I also did not, look it up on TikTok. But it was very, very, very interesting stats, and I mean, it tells you where commerce is going, and I use commerce not just a payment layer of agentic commerce, but how discoverability is working, how engagement with the consumer is working. And again, if they're seeing these types of transformation, back to your original question, Alan, how important it is for organizations to focus on becoming AI discoverable. And that this, before even looking at the payment side, is how us as an organization need to make sure that the consumer can find us using even the most traditional of AI tools.
So I'll just add a very brief personal experience to support what you're saying. I used generative AI to plan my last trip to Europe. Generative AI saved me hundreds of dollars on travel costs compared to what I found on my own. It eliminated all of my connecting flights. I had a direct flight from every single city, so my travel was a lot more seamless, and it also optimized the order in which I did everything in order to make sure that I avoided, holidays and avoided crowds, and it's just a better trip. So, I mean, the AI is certainly useful to the customer.
I am going to leave, like, I mean, I'm just going to leave a little bit of a thought before we go. And I mean, this is just a thought, okay? And for CIOs, and this is not, there's not one thing I'd say to CIOs. It is one thing. This is not about smarter AI because we know that it is getting smarter. You said, well, how autonomous is it going to get? It's about redesigning how authority and trust works when machines execute transactions. Because the machine is I'm going to say, author of this process that we never considered before. And that shift today is already underway. So this is not something that we need to be planning for. This is something that we need to be considering today, and we need to start doing today. Whatever that looks like, I think a lot of people will have a lot of questions of how do we prepare for that.
Got it. Well, that sounds like it might be a pretty good place to stop. But Irving, let me give you the last word. Do you have a final question for Barnard?
Actually, the last, Bernard said that it's so important to understand how the machines work, correct?
That is
And that,
correct.
in fact, is the subject of this next series that you have organized, where we're having the fourth uh, uh, the fourth event of
Inquiry
that
series.
series, the inquiry series, where Allan and I have been digging into how do the machines work, how do they come up with their ideas, and I have to say, as a result of getting ready for this series, and we've done 3 episodes and we're going to do a fourth one, I have learned so much. And the more we understand how the machines work, how they come up with whatever recommendations they come up, the better a job we can do in taking advantage of the machines. Really, it's very, very important to understand how do they work. When they make a mistake, why do they make a mistake? What do you mean by hallucinations, etc., etc., etc. And Allan, it's been a fascinating learning experience for you and I hope for the people who listen to this series.
Well, Irving, a lot of people don't know, but everybody who joins the Innovator Network and follows the Inquiry series, right? We put a good word in to our future overlords on their behalf, so that they'll do well in the future.
Yes,
It, a
and
lot of people don't know that, but it's true.
as you keep pointing out, I'm always very polite when I ask the machine to help me. I said, would you mind helping me edit this blog? As opposed to, God damn it, edit this blog. And you've told me that's why the machines like me, because I'm being so respectful when I interact
It's
with
true,
them.
Bernard. I don't think I told you, but the machines have a soft spot in their mechanical hearts for Irving.
I would not be surprised.
Well, Bernard, let me just say that this has been a fascinating conversation for me, and I absolutely can't wait to see you do the open Q&A at the
Thank you.
pre-event at the
Yeah,
symposium.
let's make sure that Irving is there because he is a great primer. Okay. I
Well,
I, I will say there was a one question that it follows me again is how do we test this? And as we go through this new era of AI, that's a question that sort of remains in my every time somebody presents me with something, okay, so how do we test this?
mhm.
So I've this has been a very like fantastic learning experience for me also to work with the two of you here. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to share just ideas and whatever I'm learning as well with, you and your audience.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much and take care.
Thank you.